So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to talk about something entirely new. Marguerite Duras, okay, the French barrage contre le Pacifique, okay, in English, the seawall, the seawall. I read the seawall a long time ago, well, I'm old enough to say a long time ago. But the interesting thing is that for me, you know, even reading the name, the place names, and so on, I had always the impression that the name Marguerite Duras and Marguerite Duras' work was linked to Vietnam. Okay, I never thought about Cambodia. And interestingly enough, the first time I had to face the Marguerite Duras Cambodian life was in the late 90s. I'm sorry for those who already followed my, not last lecture, but the lecture before about the Soi minority. I was working at that time about Soi language and describing this small minority right there in Vielregne, Prénop, and these places. And when I had free times at that time, I used to walk. I didn't know at that time that it was the polders, the Prénop polders, land gained on the sea. And of course, I saw this had been done many years later. You could see the concrete structure of what was Madame Donadieu's Marguerite Duras' mother, because Duras is her pen name. Her real name was Marguerite Donadieu. Okay, right there. I didn't know what it was. And all of a sudden, you can have, I would say, a kind of crisis. Prénop. I thought about l'Eden Cinéma, L'Amant, Barrage contre le Pacifique, Seawall. But it's here. It's here. First thing I did at that time was to write, okay, to Laura Adler when I was in Paris. Laura Adler is by far my favorite biographer of Marguerite Duras, and he has three main biographers, but Laura Adler was certainly one of the best. She said, was it there? I said, of course it is there. It's not in Vietnam, it's in Cambodia. It's in Cambodia, in Prénop, in Kampot, Cam, okay, region, because you know that Marguerite Duras used to change all the names here and there, and so on and so on. We're going to talk about that a bit later. So, years after that, okay, you had this, which was written here in this place, Marguerite Duras found, okay, the inspiration to write one of her masterpieces, Barrage contre le Pacifique, the seawall. But what happened at that time, okay, we are not going to talk about Marguerite Duras again, unfortunately, okay. The book was published in Barrage contre le Pacifique in 1950. In 1950, something like less than 20 years after Marguerite Duras had left Indochina. Marguerite Duras left Indochina in 1933 and never came back. So she wrote about her souvenir impressions. But the interesting thing is that she had a fantastic memory. She had a fantastic memory, details, and she produced an enormous work in the archives. Okay? Barrage contre le Pacifique could enjoy almost immediately a huge notoriety. In 1960, something like 10 years later, Geneviève Sarraut wrote a play out of it, which you can find in the Avancée of the text. 1957, Barrage contre le Pacifique, René Clément's movie. Contrary to what you can read here in French, it was not a French movie, even if René Clément was French, it was an Italian-American movie. And of course, I would say there are several opinions about René Clément. And most of French people don't even know today that he actually shoot that one. They know mainly Jeux Interdits, Forbidden Games, and a few other movies like Le Train. They don't know this one. But the interesting thing is that the movie enjoyed a real success. For instance, when you read what the New York Times wrote about that, it was certainly the masterpiece of the 2 last years, according to the New York Times. The article of the New York Times was very, very interesting. Very interesting because the journalist who wrote the article considered that it was a kind of family psychodrama, a generation conflict between the young generation, Suzanne and her brother, Joseph, and the mother. And the journalist went as far as to write, well, the collapse of the seawall, the collapse of the dike, was a symbol of, I would say, the destruction of the family and so on and so on. But interestingly enough, you can see here, this is the American title, This Angry Age. This Angry Age, nothing to do with the seawall. This Angry Age, why? But we were in the years, in the late 50s, in the 50s, in fact, in general, where, okay, the concept of anger, okay, was, I would say, extremely fashionable. Like, for instance, John Osborne looked back in anger, okay, those young, angry English writers who wanted really to throw away the preceding writer. But the interesting thing was that, okay, if we go into that, the script was, contrary to what has been written there, quite good. Okay, Peter Ustinov even was going to play, but unfortunately he had another engagement. James Dean signed. Unfortunately, he was killed 1 year later. And so death, okay, is a sufficient reason not to take and not to play in a movie. But this is what happened. But when you look at the actors, for instance, you have Anthony Perkins, Silvana Mangano, but not a small affair. The interesting thing is that only 2 voices went against the movie. One was François Truffaut, the famous Nouvelle Vague, New Wave, who said, for René Clément, the most important thing is that his movie, he was talking about this movie, would cost more than the last and less than the next. This is what he wrote about that. And the second one was Marguerite Duras. Marguerite Duras was absolutely furious. She wrote, I felt ashamed that betrayed by this movie. But betrayed why? Because in the movie you have, I would say, a few pages explicitly against colonialism. And of course, the movie doesn't talk a lot about colonialism. When you see, for instance, This Angry Age, they talk about some people paid by the government and so on. I think that the reason lies somewhere else. The reason lies somewhere else, and has nothing to do with colonialism. Marguerite Duras is a movie maker as well, and she had a kind of instinctive aggressivity towards the people, even if they had bought the rights, the people who made a movie from, I would say, her work. And of course, Italo-American, okay, you still have, for instance, La Liga sul Pacifico. So the movie is a kind of, we're going to talk about this movie again and again when we'll describe Saigo and her vision. We'll show that it's not a family drama, not a family psychodrama. It's something much more important than that. Okay? Again and again, Pine Reti made his movie. Reti Pine explicitly chose to shoot the movie only in Cambodia. The interesting thing is that he shot it exactly where the action took place, Vielrein, Prenoop, and those places. Okay, he didn't do anything about the town. The town is absent. Okay? But there, of course, Marguerite Duras, who was actually dead at the time Pine Reti shot the movie. The interesting thing is that there was something about the colonialism and so on. Okay? Translated into English in 1952, but was the first translation. There would be 2 more translations, The Seawall. One of the best translations was certainly that one in a foreign language to somewhat, okay? Marguerite Duras, okay? Such a good translation that when you read it, you got the impression that Marguerite Duras wrote in Khmer. I'm not joking. I'm not joking. It goes with such. It's Christophe Maquet and Beit Puig, where the two, frankly, they did a fantastic work of that. And something very interesting in Vietnamese. I could, and I went to the libraries, bookshop in Vietnam, and I said, was the seawall translated into Vietnamese? The answer, typically Vietnamese, yes. So where is possible to find it? It's not possible. Say how? So you had an ISBN number. You had the title, okay, Tai Binh Dương. It's exactly Barrage contre le Pacifique. You had the name, okay, of a translator, okay, Le Hong Sam, the date, and the book does not exist. One of his incredible Vietnamese story, why? No one could explain me that. I tried again and again to find the book and to say, could we have, you know, it was translated. So why it's not possible to find it and to buy it? It's not, but doesn't matter. Okay, so we know more or less, okay, what it is about. Okay, it is a major work. It is a major work, okay? And as far as Lair wrote, Marguerite Duras is a child of Indochina. Until the end of her life, she will evoke its landscapes, its lights, its smells. What would Marguerite Duras be without Indochina? Would she have become Duras? Okay. Laura Adler was certainly extraordinarily right. Mireille Naturel, one of the other Marguerite Duras biographer, wrote about the same thing and said Marguerite Duras often said she was a Creole, she was from there, and she could not imagine her work and her life without that those years she spent in Indochina. And when you look at all, is the reason why the seawall is very important. All the other works, I could have put as well inside a few works, has nothing to do with Indochina, the Ravissement, the Lord Weisstein, and so on. But you take L'Amant, the Lover, L'Amant de la Chine du Nord, from northern China, Agatha, okay, and then Cinema, okay, and Cahiers de Guerre, right? It's almost impossible to understand those books without having an idea of the famous plain, that part of Cambodia where Barrage contre le Pacifique, the seawall, took place. It means that the seawall was the first Marguerite Duras novel, the first one. And all the subsequent books and novels published by that were, I would say, more or less being the same structure as we see with the opposition between the town, the plain, and so on. This is something very important. In any case, it's impossible to understand Marguerite Duras without, okay, I would say this, the plain of Cam. Okay, well, Cam, we had to wait a long time to know what it was. It is in fact Compote, bordered on one side by the China Sea, which the mother obstinately called the Pacific Ocean, since the China Sea seemed to her somewhat trifling and provincial. And because when she was young, it was of the Pacific Ocean that she dreamed. The place is called Prenup. This is not in the seawall, but she wrote it afterwards. This name is on star map, Prenup, a village of 40 huts. It is 80 kilometers from Compote, the first and last and only time she used the word and the name Compote. And 2 years before she passed away in 1996, Marguerite Duras made public all her archives, books, and everything. And thanks to that, we could see a bit more, in a more clear way, inside the story. The novel is deep inside the Indochinese reality. Marguerite Duras said it herself. The work I had to do to bring my mother, my brother, myself, Indochina, all the suffering of the peasants of the Elephant Range. The Elephant Range is the mountain range not far from Villeray. The children who died of cholera, and so on, into a book. You can imagine. There are several intricate stories inside Barrage contre le Pacifique. First, the mother and the fight against the colonial administration and the assaults of the Pacific Ocean. The plane, okay, on the one side, the Land Registry Office, Campot, CAM, in the book, the French administration right there, Marguerite Duras and her mother, Madame Donadieu, was a victim of the French administration right there. And on the other side, okay, the Pacific Ocean, the South China Sea, especially in the month of May, June. Right? So the mother, you can see here a picture from Heinrich's movie, building the dikes, okay, with tree trunks, not concrete. A dream would have had to have concrete and use concrete to build the dikes, which is not possible. Okay? At once, the very first year, she had put half of the concession under cultivation, hoping that the first harvest would enable her to pay off the greater part of the expenses on the building of the bungalow. But the flood tides of July had made, okay, an onslaught on the plain, drowning the crops. Believing that she had been the victim of an unusual occurrence and against the advice of people of the plain, Ma had begun all over again the next year. And again, the sea had risen. So then she had to admit the truth. The land was irreclaimable. Each year, the sea invaded it. True, the sea did not rise the same extent each year, but it always rose enough to destroy everything either directly or by infiltration. Except for the 5 hectares of land bordering the road and in the middle of what she had built, her bungalow, she had thrown her savings of 10 years into the Pacific Ocean. This is a tragedy of Mrs. Donadieu. Here, walking Isabelle Huppert playing Mrs. Donadieu's part on the dike. Suzanne, the daughter. Of course, Suzanne is Marguerite Duras, but she always keep a distance. She will never say je, I, or something like that. She always stays apart from it. It's an incredible the way she remains neutral from the first pages to the last. She never, okay, takes sides. Right? She's totally outsider. Suzanne, Joseph, the mother. La mère, Suzanne, Joseph. And of course, maybe one day, okay, Suzanne at the age of sensuality, a man would stop because he had seen her sitting near the bridge. Why not? Possibly he would like her looks and would offer to take her to the city. Here's a photograph of her brother, Joseph. Okay, Joseph, a white boy with reading loaves, and Monsieur Jo. Well, Monsieur Jo was there, okay. Suzanne refuses to give herself while accepting his gifts. His gifts, like a phonogram, for instance, and then a diamond, which is at the center of the history. Monsieur Jo was bursting with joy. Maybe his case would be reconsidered. He looked from one to the other, hoping at last to be accepted as a benefactor of the family, but in vain. To none of these people around him was there any connection between the phonographs present and his daughter. The corruption of the French administration at the Campot Land Registry Office. We have here, it's not the Land Registry Office, but it's here the offices of the residence. The misery of the peasant of the Riam Plain. Marguerite Duras really did a kind of real ethnographic work about that, in which she compared all the statistics at her disposal. You can see that in her manuscripts. And she wrote as well that the best land had already been given to the Chinese to plant pepper. Right? The worst land still remained where her mother was. The dying children, every year at the mango season, the children could be seen perched in the branches or waiting hungrily under the trees. And in the following days, they died in great napper. And the children, the next day, took their place of his children on the same mango trees. And in the following days, they died. And finally, colonial exploitation. Colonial exploitation, there were two important episodes. One, Marguerite Duras doesn't talk about, is the road to the Bokor, where hundreds of people actually died building a road in the jungle. And the second one was the road to Riem. The road to Riem, which was, I would say, not a small affair. The reality, because there is a reality beside the novel, which is interesting. But Marguerite Marie Legrand, okay, Donadieu, was born in 1877. She married in 1904 Flavien Obscur, okay, the so well-named Flavien Obscur, because we don't hear about him anymore. We don't hear about him anymore. They arrived in Saigon, okay, where she taught in Zadine school. The interesting thing is that Marguerite Duras explained that both of them, Madame Donadieu, Marie Donadieu, and Flavien Obscur, had been educated with pictures showing colonial employees looking at the sunset, big posters, surrounded by servants, and so on and so on. So they dreamt of the colony. Flavien Obscur passed away in 1907. In 1909, okay, she marries Henri Donadieu. There were 3 children. Okay, for them. Marguerite Duras was born in 1914. In 1920, Henri Donadieu is appointed to a post in Phnom Penh. Marie becomes director of the Norodom School. The Norodom School doesn't exist anymore, but it was a little red school, still visible a few years ago, not very far from the Vatana Tower, right there. Henri Donadieu passed away in 1921, and from 1922 to 1924, they and the whole family went 2 years in France. Not much remains of that, and there is no souvenir from Marguerite Duras about those 2 years spent in France. In 1924, Marie is appointed to SADC, and in 1926, okay, Marie buys a land concession in Prénoup. The novel begins there. Prénoup, okay, 1926, and for the first time in 1927, Marie and whole family decided to spend the Christmas holidays right there, because contrary to a well-established legend, okay, this is the concession right there. The Villeray Gulf, okay, Campot is here. Bon, to give you an idea, Sihanoukville, Kampong Saum, which did not exist at that time because it was built in the early 60s, was there, and the concession was right there. Marguerite, Madame Donadieu's bungalow was right here. Right here. Okay? Oh, you can imagine. So what happened? Contrary to what has been written, they never stayed here a long time. They used very often to spend a weekend, few holidays, 1 month or 2 months during the summer holidays. They left from SADC, okay, went along the Gulf, Campot and Prénoup, right here, where the concession was, okay, right there. Là, okay. Prénoup, it was the end of the world. From Saigon, the journey lasted 2 days, from SADC, 1 night and 1 day. Mother always left at night. Paolo, the little brother, took the opportunity to smell for the wild beast at each stop and drove the hunting rifle if necessary. The family, accompanied by a driver and the old servant, though, crossed immense plains, rice fields interspersed with coconut and betel-nut trees to finally arrive at a kind of country where there were no more villages, no more habitation, a land of water, of marshes. This is a remarkably realistic description. When, even today, well, today, not exactly now, but something like 10 years ago, when you cross a border, coming from Vietnam, for instance, near Hat Yien, and little by little, you go to Prenup, you could see, I would say, a landscape which really looks like that. I remember very well the first time I was there, and after I was sure that Marguerite Duras had actually lived there, I read again the book, and I was struck by the realism of the book. It was really a very, very realistic description of a place. Okay, the land concession. 1926 is the year when Madame Donadieu bought the land concession. 1937, as she is entirely ruined, is the year when she was finally offered the concession. We have a problem right here. You can see something very interesting. This is a map of French Indochina. Cochin China is here. But Cochin China was a colony, as we'll see a bit later, the first and the last French colony in the Far East. Cambodia was not a colony. It has been a protectorate since 1863. But you can imagine that the French law about property and things like that did not apply in Cambodia. So the interesting thing was land concession. We have behind the scene the question of private property in Cambodia. But the question of private property, there were something like tens of books written about that, mainly by Aymonier. When the French arrived here in 1863, the land was obviously the king. The king let the Cambodian peasant cultivate the land in exchange of 10% of the harvest every year, and the promise not to leave the land for more than 3 years. Apart from that, the Cambodian peasant was free on his land. But what the king could tolerate for the Cambodian peasant, he could not offer the French. He could not offer the French for the simple reason that they were not concerned by that. You can imagine the following. The French here and there tried to get some properties and some land. In 1871, they could get in Ko Sutin, the Mekong, 50 kilometers north of Phnom Penh, a few hectares to plant Egyptian cotton. The rainy season came too early, everything was destroyed. Bad luck. 1881, they could get in Ka Nyang Day, not very far from here, the Silk Island, they could get another land to plant indigo. Unfortunately for them, no one wanted to work for them. Why would a free Cambodian peasant on his land, why would he work for a master, above all a foreign master? So no point, no question. What happened at that time is that for the French, the idea was, I would say, simple. First, to create property, as I say, to create property, contrary to what Aymonier explained, to create property, in reality, the land was already entrusted to the king, but the possession granted to the cultivator. The land was de facto owned by Cambodians. Yes, but what that was for Cambodian people, it wasn't for the French. What they wanted was precisely to have the possibility to get the land. But the fact is that they tried everything and the contrary of everything. The idea was to create private property and at the same time to abolish slavery. Like that, those free slaves would be able to work on the French land. But this, of course, never really worked. For the king, it would have meant to renounce his power, and to abandon his prerogative. This was what was at stake. What happened was the following one. In June 1884, Thomson, this is a British drawings. Charles Thomson, who was the governor of Cochin China, entered on June 3rd, 1884, with a gun in the king's bedroom. Okay, Majesty, you sign or you abdicate. You sign or you abdicate. The king had no more choice, okay, to abdicate for the simple reason that his elder brother, the future King Sisowat, had already explained to the French that in case Norodom wouldn't like to reign anymore, he was ready. All right? But this would happen. So, okay, the king had no more choice, and he signed what? I, Norodom I, put my trust in our protector to develop our country. Private property was created, and so on. But what happened afterwards, okay, was soon, a few months later, February 1885, okay, a kind of civil war began. Right? Almost everywhere in Cambodia. An isolated post was taken by the guerrilla, the officers were killed, and so on. This lasted almost 2 years, okay? And it was particularly violent in Kampot. Even Adhémar Leclerc wrote a book, Histoire de Kampot, de la rébellion dans cette province. You see, Histoire de Kampot, de la rébellion, of a rebellion, okay, in this province. It means that the rebellion was strong there in the Kampot region. The French finally in 1886 decided to negotiate with the king. His Majesty did not understand the reality of our intention. The king had perfectly well understood, but, okay, Norodom was not a small king. He saw that his country was little by little being destroyed, and he decided to negotiate. The French withdrew their pretension, but little by little, the result was that private property and the land registry office was created in Phnom Penh, and they were in the provinces. Okay, so there was a system of land concession. The system of land concession, established by a decree of the Superior Resident in July 1920, a land concession could be awarded free of charge or sold. A limit of 300 acres had been set for those land concessions awarded free of charge. A very long procedure had to be scrupulously followed by Marie Donadieu. Very long. Normally, it would have been 3 years. The seawall a few years ago, a little box was found in the archives. I think it's Marie-Christine Huguen who found it there, okay? And she gave it to Luc Maugenet, who wrote a book about it. It was very interesting, about Marguerite Duras au Cambodge, Marguerite in Cambodia. The interesting thing is that when you read all those papers, you know, the administrative, you need to be very patient to be able to read what the then French bureaucracy wrote on those papers. And it makes no sense. The fact is that the seawall, Marguerite Duras' novels, is the access code to the archives language. There are differences in details between the official version given to us by the archive and the novel, but there is no doubt about the fraudulent behavior of land registry official. It was, to put it in clear terms, a pathetic con. 1926, Donadieu purchased 199-hectare concession from a Vietnamese. There were incredible administrative delays, big investments by Marie Donadieu, constant destruction of the dikes. 1937, the concession was granted. 11 years afterwards, Marguerite Nadieu is totally ruined. My mother told us how it would have been necessary to massacre, to eliminate the white people who had stolen the hope of a life, as well as the hope of the peasants of the plain of Prenup. This is the novel. It's very interesting when you read the novel, for instance, okay? According to the novel, none of the concession on the plain had been accorded a definite title. These were the concessions which easily enabled the land agent to make a considerable profit on the others, the real and arable concessions. The choice of attribution was left to them. The agent of the land survey reserved the right to distribute according to their own best interests, immense reserve of irreclaimable lands. On the 15-land conception of the plain of Cam, they had settled, ruined, driven up, resettled, and again ruined and driven up perhaps 100 families. The only claim orders who had remained on the plain lived by traffic in opium or absinthe, having to buy off the cadastral agents by paying them a quota on their irregular earnings, illegal earnings, according to the agent. Okay. This is the letter she writes in 1929. Of course, it's a very polite letter. Sir, I'm a honest person. I've been working years in SADC and so on as a school teacher and then as a schoolmaster, so on and so on. I would like now to be able to finally enjoy the title and so on and so on. No answer. This is the third letter she wrote them. And this is the interpretation. Okay? I'm not going to read all of it, to the cadastral agent of CAM. The interpretation, Marguerite Duras. In less polite term, it is almost exactly what the official letter says. Excuse me from writing again to you. Okay? I know my letters are useless to you, but it's obvious, for I have had no reply, okay, for many months. Okay? The piece of land is on the fringe of the rest of my concession, which, as you know well, is absolutely irreclaimable. And so on and so on. Okay? So, okay, she talks about your life. This is the letter in the novel. And for the saving I put aside every day for 15 years of my life, of my youth, what did you give me? A desert of salt and water. And you let me give you my money. Okay? And so, what have you given me in return for those 15 days of my life? Nothing. Wind and water. And when you read the document and the real letter she actually wrote, which is available in the National Archive of Cambodia, you discover that the content is exactly the same. Polite and administrative on the one side, and on the other side, okay, that kind of hyperbolic Marguerite Duras way of explaining all that. Finally, in 1937, she gets arrêté concession définissant the attribution. She got it avis favorable. Yes, but at that time she was entirely ruined. She has spent all her money building the dikes and so on. She was not able with that to get any more money to borrow from banks, anything to be able to build real concrete dikes, which was her aim from the beginning. This, okay. So, as you can see, okay, the book, Barrage contre le Pacifique, the sea wall, okay, is, okay, I would say, a key to the coded language we can find in the archives. Right? That kind of very polite administrative documents and things like that. The reality, on the contrary, is right there. Is right there. Right? It is a typical code. Right? And looking deeper into the archives about the Kampuchea region, you discover, I'm not going to talk about that because it would take too much time, but you discover a number of elements about it which are quite interesting. Marguerite Duras went to Kampuchea. What about Kampuchea? The author's landscape, we have a kind of duration geography. I'm going to insist on that. You have three elements in the book: Kam, the plain, and the city. Kam is, of course, Kampuchea. Okay? The Kampuchea region, okay, developed very well. The first colonial road was completed in 1910. Originally, there was a harbor in Kampuchea, and the king Anduong had built the first road, modern road, from his capital Udong to Kampuchea, where he has a harbor. When the French arrived here, they decided that there is a harbor in Kampuchea, so we are going to build the first colonial road, which is exactly parallel to Anduong's road. When they arrived in Kampuchea, and the road was finally completed, they discovered that Kampuchea was not really the ideal place to build a freshwater harbor. Okay? And so the road, okay, as it was intended to link Phnom Penh to a harbor, was totally useless. Right? That was the first problem. They could have done it before. So they decided little by little to use Riem, and they built a little structure in Riem. It didn't really work right there. And finally, they used Saigon. They used Saigon, which was the entrance and exit door of Cambodia. All the Cambodian, I would say, goods imported from Cambodia, imported to Cambodia, and exported from Cambodia, they used the Mekong and the Bassac River, and in Saigon, from Saigon, they were exported abroad. The interesting thing is that the Cambodians said at that time, the French could transform their Cambodian protectorate into the colony of Cochin China, into the colony of the Cochin Chinese colony. Then you had the pepper fever. The pepper fever began in 1880. After 1875, the Aceh Sultan decided to destroy his pepper plantation, not to have the pepper being taken by the Dutch. From 1895 to 1905, the pepper production was multiplied by 200 in the Kampot region. You can imagine that was absolutely enormous. So the French protectorate had to take a number of measures to limit that or to sell. Yes. Kampot became an important center in 1905. It was a Chinese town, very interesting, with Chinese building almost everywhere. When they talk about colonial architecture in Kampot, it's not colonial architecture, it's Chinese architecture, but French urban planning. Town planning is French, the buildings are Chinese, right, inside. Something very interesting, okay, you have here the residence here, first version, the second version, the residence, okay. The bungalow was right there, a typical French colonial town. In the late 20s, they built that casino on the top of a Bokok mountain, okay, kept the famous bungalow in Kep. So you see, it was an important town, knowing that only in 1907, the second town of Cambodia, Battambang, would be given back to Cambodia by the Treaty of March 1907. Okay, Cape, of course, but Kampot is not the object of any description in the novel. Marguerite Duras entirely ignores Kampot. Freedom of freedom. Kampot is reduced to only one thing: the Land Registry Office. This is the former Land Registry Office in Kampot. Now they have a new building. It means that she totally ignores it. She doesn't want, for her, it's a kind of stigmatized Land Registry Office. The people from the Land Registry Office, this is the way she talks about Kampot. Then you have the plain, the world of the mother, okay? Is between Kam and Ram. We know now that Kam is Kampot and Ram is Riem. Sometimes it's called Rame, okay, in the text. It's an area limited by the Land Registry Office in Kampot and the attacks of the Pacific Ocean. The mother intends to transform that area into a viable space. This kind of country where there was no more villages, no more habitation, and of water, of marshes. For Suzanne and Joseph, living was the only possibility. Of course, you had the Bart Tavern. Okay? This is what Pagneretti did, okay, to shoot this movie, okay, where she, Suzanne, met Monsieur Jo. Okay. Monsieur Jo, is he the Chinese lover? Okay. She will write about him in The Lover, L'Amant, afterwards. Okay. The Chinese lover actually existed. We know them very well. Here is his house in Sadek. Okay. And here is his grave, and his grave, Wintuile. He really existed. Marguerite Duras, before she passed away, thanks to Jean-Jacques Hano, knew that he could have met the Chinese lover. In any case, okay, Monsieur Jo offers Marguerite Duras a diamond. And in order to sell the diamond, this is the third space, Cam, the plane, and the first space, the city, they decided to go to Saigon. The plane, the word of the mother, for sale, magnificent diamond, exceptional bargain, applied to office. The whole family goes then to Saigon, settled in a small hotel, okay, well, a kind of strange hotel with Carmen, and the character of Carmen is quite interesting thing. The city is by definition the antithesis of the play. Suzanne and Joseph's space, a world subject to description. When we look at the city, we have to consider the birth of Saigon. Saigon is the first, and Cochinchina is the first colony in the French colony in Indochina. Originally, the idea was the following one. Southeast Asia has become British Lake. It's high time for the French to have colonies and protectorates. So what they did, they wanted to have colony, but no one was ready to take the decision. How much is it going to cost? The admiral, Charnière, Lagrandière, Genouilly, Lafont, decided to attack. On February 1859, February 17, 1859, they shelled the Saigon harbor and they took it. Okay. Soon after that, Cochinchina, now south of Vietnam, Saigon capital, was placed under military administration. And in 1865, it became a colony. You have here de la Grandière, the Admiral de la Grandière. It's the reason why it's called the Admiral's Cochinchina. It's precisely the land of Marguerite Duras, right there. They settled there. You have here the first residence, okay? Well, and very interesting, because you can notice that Marguerite Duras is strongly fascinated by Saigon. What fascinates her in Saigon? But in the minds of the Admiral, it was a question of building a modern French town. But the initial plot can still easily be read. The development of the lower town, like the maritime couriers, okay, the first building in 1863. First, there was a decision to merge Saigon and Chalon into a single city, the improvement of the existing roads and development of new ones. Okay, as you can see very well the Notre Dame Palace right here, the cathedral here, and all the street going up the hill and right down the famous Catina Street. Well, here the famous Catina Street as well. This building, the courthouse, was completed in 1865, 2 years after the first French building. The cathedral in 1880, it took something like a long time to take, and finally the post office in 1891, right here. You see a typical neoclassical style. Then there was a second period, construction of several new buildings. Interestingly enough, like the municipal theater, now the Opera House, which was completed in 1900. And then the Hôtel de Ville, the town hall. This is highly interesting. This one was completed in 1906, but you have to consider that the decision to build it was taken in 1871, and it's the same for all the buildings in Saigon: procrastination, taking the time, corruption, and so on. This is precisely what was going to have a strong influence on the building of a city. And finally, the Bentine Market, that was in 1914. But the municipality of Saigon was paralyzed by conflict of interest, endless procrastination, and so on. There was a lack of decisive action by public authority, but the field was open to rich entrepreneurs. like, for instance, the famous Huy Bon Roi. Huy Bon Roi, Marguerite Duras wrote something about it. It's now the art museum in Saigon. That was a Chinese family, but the building was based on feng shui, very elaborated principle. You can find all the possible styles here and there, something absolutely beyond imagination. And the fact is that, Saigon, and that was the Saigon paradox, a considerable economic development, but in town planning, a desert. And finally, the third period, in 1920, the Chamber of Commerce, and in 1926, the Bank of Indochina. This is fascinating, when you look at a building like that, for instance. Well, it looks like a fortress, The fortress and inside is really tempered by a beautiful Art Deco style. And outside you've got, for instance, a remarkable anthology of all the Indo-Chinese style here and there. But the only problem is that the possession of a building, the joyful disorder of Saigon as far as urban planning is concerned, just put this enormous building in a position where, the eyes cannot see it at a distance. It's absolutely impossible. I don't know how this photograph was taken, but frankly, it was already not so easy. The last point was Ebrard, who came to Saigon. Ebrard is well known in Cambodia because he's the one who built the Grand Hotel, the Royal. Ebrard was not a small one. In 1912, he restored the Diocletian Palace in Split. In 1917, he rebuilt the center of Salonique, destroyed by a fire. In 1923, he was in Hanoi. He was the head of the town planning service. And in 1925, he was in Phnom Penh. Between 1923 and 1925, he went to Saigon. He went to Saigon and explained everyone. This is a point which is very important because it tells a lot about the way things were done in Saigon. It tells everyone that, he praised the work before, like the admirals, big avenues, the canals which had been filled. All that was, I would say, a positive point. But he added, we have seen too little, too small. The city had developed. We need a real harbor. We need a real station. He complained about the scarcity of public spaces. They politely listened to him, did nothing, and if Ebrard is known in Saigon, it's only because they let him design a school, the famous Lycée Petruski. Now, having this in mind, what does Marguerite Duras write about Saigon? Saigon, obviously, is not the usual colonial city. When you consider, for instance, what the French wrote in their history of European town about the colonial city, the model is Hanoi, not Saigon, definitely not. A urban history is singularly complicated. This is exactly what Marguerite Duras liked. All the contradiction of a colonial policy could be found there. Multi-ethnicity, birthplace of Indo-Chinese modernity, the triumph of a here and now creativity against unrealistic norms. Marguerite Duras, it was a large city of 100,000 inhabitants, spread out on either sides of a wide and beautiful river. Here we are. As in all colonial cities, there were two towns within this one, the White Town and the other. And in the White Town, there were still other differences. And here, it's absolutely fascinating. We consider that a magic brothel where the white race could enjoy in diluted peace the sacred spectacle of its existence. It is the way she sees that. The upper section, there is a low and upper section of a town. Now she's talking about the upper section corresponding more or less to the now Dachau. Okay? The description she provides is absolutely incredible. When you read books like, for instance, Philippe Franquin, Continental Saigon, where he talks about his life in Saigon, you can discover that it is exactly the same kind of consideration, a kind of dream, totally cut from the reality, made a fortune or just seek space wide, okay? Heedless steps of a powerful in repose, avenues glided where caution cars and caution wheels, a kind of dream we have here, a kind of dream totally cut from society, a kind of, I would say, social class living there, which has nothing to do with the usual social fabric, and is very well rendered by even money here must appear to serve no real purpose. The wealth of the white must not weigh heavily upon them. Okay? And of course, okay, you have the word noble, aristocratic. Noble aristocratic means for someone in the French tradition who got a position due to his birth and certainly not to his work and activity. A kind of new class, okay, from nowhere. And of course, it was a glittering age for Grande Époque. It's very important when you look at the way we get there, okay? You can see the way it was represented at the time. This was the, and the other one, the circuit of the trolley cars scrupulously avoided the fashionable upper district. Indeed, trolley would have been useless in that part of the city where everyone rode in his own car. Only the native and the poor white trash of the lower district used the trolley. You see, we have another, in the white world, a distinction between, I would say, the rich in the upper part of the city and in the lower part, the poorest one. Naturally, no white person worthy of the name would ever have ventured to use these trolley cars. To be seen in one would be to lose face, colonial face. In these districts, okay, were to be found the white who had made no fortune, the colonial native, you might call them. There the street were without trees, the lawn disappears, there the shops of the white people were replaced by native apartments, houses. You see, this remarkable way in a few pages to put, okay, the difference, to characterize the difference between the two towns where white people are living, the rich and not so rich here. The interesting thing is that when we consider that, we have the impression of a shooting of a novel. Let's not forget that Marguerite Duras was a movie maker. This is a point I would like to defend here. Marguerite Duras was a movie maker, but she was not exactly and only a movie maker. Many novels, especially Barrage contre le Pacifique, the Sea War, has to be understood as, I would say, a movie. Personally, okay, when I was there in Saigon, I just closed my house and considered the Marguerite Duras landscape, okay? It started in what is called, okay, Dachau. You have all the street, the Street, which starts, okay, from the Northern Palace, now it's a Republic, Independence Palace. The cathedral is here. It goes up, a kind of incredible movie film panoramic from left to right. It reaches the cathedral right here. And from the cathedral, it goes down to the Catina Street, reaches the lower part of the town and, okay, the quays where you have a port. This kind of continuum, which is in the same time what Marguerite Duras uses a lot and which is a part of her style, a geographic continuum, like that, a geographic panoramic, which is in the same time a social panoramic. It is a kind of, I would say, geographical difference and class difference which are filmed. Frankly, it's really a kind of movie. You can understand that Marguerite Duras had always many problems with almost everyone who decided to shoot a movie about her work. For instance, you take Hannot, Jean-Jacques Hannot, the one who shot The Lover. The Lover, he had already written the screenplay, and he arrived with a screenplay to meet Marguerite Duras. He said, "Oh, dear Marguerite, you know, I wrote that." Jean-Jacques, no. It's not what I want. I've already written a screenplay. Ah, no, Marguerite, it was not in our agreement. We already signed. I bought the right. No. She finally let him shoot his movie. She couldn't do else. And at the same time, what is very interesting, she published the screenplay under the name L'Amant de la Chine du Nord, The Lover from Northern China. She had always a problem with movies shot in that, simply because when you read a novel like that and you have this wonderful panoramic, geographic and social, where she creates a logic as we have seen before, Saigon lacks any town planning logic. It's not like Hanoi. In Hanoi, you can very easily read it. In Saigon, you have a traditional town planning which obeys what the Admiral Charner, Lagrandière, Genouilly, Lafont had in mind. And after that, as early as 1895, all that disappeared. You had, I would say, that kind of remarkable disorder which applies to Saigon. Hanoi is not like that. Hanoi, you can read it in a much more rational way. Saigon, no. It's an incredible disorder. It's what Marguerite Duras enjoys a lot. She wrote a few things about that as well. She loves it. Why? Because for her, it's precisely the place where she can recreate an order of herself, especially a kind of geographic and social order. You see the town of the rich right here in Dachau, okay? And then we go up the church, we go down through the Katina Street, and we arrive to the quays, the poor white with the trolleys and so on. You see, this is something absolutely remarkable. It's not only there, but the book is a movie. Not only for that. Spaces and representation. You have two, I would say, spaces. The plain on the one side, the city on the other side. And frankly, when you analyze them and compare them one to each other, you can see the big difference. This place, okay, is an unstructured space. The plain is an unstructured space. The city can be an organized space. The plain is not subject to any description in the model. Extreme poverty, the description, dying children, extreme poverty, and, okay, you have two poles. On the one side, the Pacific Ocean, the South China Sea, and on the other side, the Land Registry Office in Kampot. The plain is what stands in the middle. Okay? The city can be the object of a consistent description. Ethnicity, white, non-white, social dimension, rich, poor. The plain, you have no limits. The place is defined by human presence, a bit like if you consider the Cambodian Pom. The Pom is a number of houses and families living there without a particular frontier. Here, okay, in the city, you have essential limits, geographical and social, upper space, lower space. And she's very clear about that. And more, the place is the mother's dreams. The plates belong to the mother's dream. She is doing all, I would say, she can to transform this plain into viable space. Okay? The city, a framework for the hopes of Suzanne and Joseph. Let's wait a little bit. There's a very interesting coincidence. There's a French philosopher, Souriau, Étienne Souriau, who in 1951 wrote an article, La structure de l'univers filmique et le vocabulaire de la filmologie. Okay? Film universe structure and the vocabulary vocabulary of filmology. And he invented, not him because he took it from his wife, Evelyn Souriau, who in 1950, the year when Marguerite Duras Sea Wall was published, Evelyn Souriau invented the term diegesis. Diegesis, translated by everything that is supposed to happen according to the fiction presented by the film. It's about movies. Now they use it about geography, literature, but at the time it was about movies. Okay? Everything that this fiction would imply if we assume to be true. But it is definitely opposed to mimesis. Mimesis to tell a story. Diegesis to show. Okay? In diegesis, there is no more frontier between reality and fiction. But in the diegetic space, as defined by Souriau, okay, his wife and SS, there is an essential relationship between the characters and their spatial environment. Okay? Characters and their spatial environment. Okay? As there are some Russian here, they will very well understood that this idea is not you. You can find it in Khlebnikov, okay? You can find it in all the futurist theoretization of the turn of the century, and so on. But it means that in order to a realistic spatial environment, you need, to use character. And this was an idea in the 50s in France, which was very strong. For instance, I give you a movie everyone knows, Henri-Georges Clouzot. Okay? Marguerite Duras admires him. Okay? The movie is, of course, Salaire de la Peur. In English, can tell you, Wages of Fear. Well, British people and American people know it as well because Christopher Nolan, as he shot Dunkirk, was inspired by that. And not long ago, there was a remake of the Wages of Fear. But European men were hired by an American oil company to drive 2 trucks loaded with nitroglycerin needed to extinguish an oil well fire over mountains, dirt road, and so on. But what happened is the following one. You have 2 main characters here. But one is played by Charles Banel, but not by Yves Montand. This one is Mario, this one is Joe. In the town, Mario dominates everything. He is the little gangster who knows very well how to behave, what to do, to take advantage of a situation. As soon as he is on the road, this one who is not at all adapted to the life in the town loses everything. But as soon as they are on the road, it is the contrary. This one becomes a master, and this one, is simply pathetically there, unable to take any decision, afraid, This is, one of the best, understanding of this diegetic space. It is exactly what Marguerite Duras does in her, the plane, the mother's world, the city, Suzanne and Joseph worlds, the plane, Suzanne and Joseph, boredom, waiting and dreams, Bart Staven, the phonogram, Ramona, The city, the discovery of a new world, Carmen for Suzanne, discovery of love for Joseph. The mother is back to the plane to die. Following unsuccessful attempts to sell the diamond, the mother doesn't leave the hotel anymore. You see, the character acts according to the space in which they are. It gives the space a realistic and reliable dimension. On the one side, the plane for the mother, on the other side, the town for Suzanne and Joseph. It's something remarkably balanced. I think that this is the true message. I would say the originality of the Sea Wall, not a family psychodrama or something like that. On the contrary, it's something much deeper for that. And it's one of the reasons why Marguerite Duras didn't really like the way movies were shot after that. And you can see, for instance, the mother's ambition. Seen from the plane, seen from the city. From the planes, her new project. She was going to ask the natives who lived miserably on the adjacent lands to construct with her a barrier against the sea wall. It would be profitable to all of them. The dike would follow the sea coast, the Pacific coast, she called it, and would ascend the Rack, which is a little river, up to the highest level of the July flood tides. So from the plane, everything is great, the marvelous project. From the city, Carmen knew the mother well. She knew the story of the seawall, the conception, and so on. Ma made her think of a ravaging monster, she said. Man had played havoc with a piece of hundreds of peasants on the plain. Negative. She had even tried to conquer the Pacific Ocean. Joseph and Suzanne might be on their guard against her. She had had so much misfortune that she had become a monster, a mighty spell, and so on and so on. You see the way the ideology, I would say, is created here, and the way the parts are distributed. On the one side, the mother, seen from the plane as a part which is almost heroic. On the other side, okay, and this was the opinion the French had at that time, she was mad. She was simply insane. Okay, this is a kind of filter which comes on the space. You can see the importance of the space here and the relationship, which is certainly one of the strongest point of the novel, the relationship between the space and the character. And this is a possible reading of it. But now, back to the plane where Marguerite Duras' mother was. She was considered as being totally insane. In the Campot Land Registry Office, they call her the insane person, la folle. Okay. Strangely enough, Marie Donadieu's vision worked. Okay. And you had the polders. They used this Dutch word, the polders, to describe the land gain on the sea. Okay? And this lasted from 1936, the year Marie Donadieu abandoned everything, to 2002. 1936, the French built the first dike. The Khmer Rouge in 1975, the dike 75, right here. Okay, this is what remains today of that gigantic work. Okay, and from 1996 to 2002, the French Development Agency for Development decided to rehabilitate the polders. 89 kilometers of dikes, 133 kilometers of canal, 1,500 hectares abandoned are now cultivated again. The idea of Mrs. Donadieu, against all odds, was a perfectly realistic one, as it is realized today. And you can go there and visit the polders without any problem. This is more or less what we have today. I don't know if you have visited it, but frankly, it's highly interesting. So, as a conclusion, we saw that this novel was indeed a realistic novel, from 2 points of view. First, it describes something which actually truly happened, and in the same time, there is no frontier between the reality and the fiction. The landscape, the character, and the writing produce something absolutely coherent. And I concluded to show that this novel was not exactly written, it was shot. So the shooting of a novel. I thank you for your attention.